Hi guys, welcome to your Unit 9 Notes Section 3. If you have not watched the first two videos on your Section 1 and Section 2 of the notes, please go back and watch those now. These best go in order, so it's better to just go in the exact order that they're listed here. Notice that we have section 3 here, and there is nothing listed for any homework. I'm putting homework in quotations. I know you can't see me, but there is no homework for this section. Instead, I figured I'd give you the day if you haven't caught up on the documents of the 1920s. Today would be a good day to do that. So we are going to tackle section 3 of the notes. Here we go. So today is all of the fun stuff. This is one of the days that I wish we were in class together so that we could have a really good discussion about this. But you get to listen to me, and hopefully you're having a discussion with your computer just like I am with mine. Let's start. A changing culture. I cannot express to you how big the changes were of the 1920s at this time. They don't sound that monumental to us now. I know it's going to sound crazy, some of the stuff that we're talking about, but they were huge during this time. So what are we talking about? First, we are going to see a change in the work week. We talked about this a little bit last time with Ford. During the 1850s, so leading into the Civil War, following the Civil War, people were working 70 hours a week, if not more. I mean, we talked about the hours and hours and hours that people would spend in the factories. And then we're going to see that change to 55 hours roughly in 1910. So that's going to be after the Progressive Era reforms. And then we're going to see another decline to 45 hours because now we have the average work week. We're getting a couple days off every week. We're lessening those hours to between 8 and 10 hours a day. It's a big change. So, like I said before, the work week is no longer 7 days, it's on average 5 days. Does that mean that there were people who weren't working more than 5? No. There were people who were still working 7 days a week, but the average was 5. Also, on average, wages and salaries are on the rise, so people are making more money. And if we look at people making more money and having more time to do what they want to do, we're going to see an increase in leisure activities. Also, like we talked about last time, technology is going to advance in both suburban, outside the city, and urban, inside the city, making more options for what a leisure activity is. So let's take a peek. We are going to see the silent movie come out during this time. This is huge. Why silent movies? Because not everybody spoke English. You want to play to the largest audience possible. And in that picture up at the top, you can see that there was a silent movie on the screen, and then there's a live band down in the front. They would play the music along with the movie for the audience to see. So it wasn't completely silent. There's a little music, but I'll show you in a second what we're talking about. Also, we're going to see radios. Radios are going to bring music into homes around the country, but also, and most importantly, you're going to hear like talk shows. You're going to hear speeches. You're going to hear stories on the radio, which is going to connect the country. Both of these, the movies, the radio, what we're hearing, all Americans could share in the same pop culture. just like we do today. Before, it was very fragmented, very segmented what people were doing, but now we all have the same idea. So let's take a peek at a silent movie. This is going to be a very famous Charlie Chaplin clip here. I challenge you not to laugh because this is great.
Everyone likes paying.
Okay, so that's just an example of a silent movie. Notice that even the small part that you did have to read, it wasn't in English, but it didn't matter. If you couldn't read it, you could still understand the film. And that's something that people would go and watch in their abundance of free time. The Age of Heroes. During the 1920s, people are going to look at these entertainers, these people who are going out and performing in one way or another as heroes, especially sporting events, those athletes. These are going to be something that were on the radio. These are going to be something that were painted across the newspapers. You're going to see stars in football, baseball, boxing, And these people, their names are going to become household names. Athletes like Babe Ruth, Jack Dempsey are going to be known as heroes in this golden age of sports. People want to be distracted from what's happening. They want to aspire to be like someone, and these athletes are exactly that. You're also going to see Charles Lindbergh, an aviator, someone who flies planes, being best known for crossing the Atlantic on the first solo nonstop trip. This is huge. It shows a survivor story. It shows the progression of our technology. It's a very big deal, and people want to have this sense of hope being restored after World War I. They want to believe in something positive to see the nation advance. Women, the traditional role of women is going to be challenged during this time. Before, women were home-centered. That was their role in the family. But now we are going to have what we call the new woman be created. We have a shorter hemline. Notice in those pictures you can see some ankle. Very scandalous. Women are going to start wearing makeup. They are going to go dancing. Women are going to push out of that traditional role because they see themselves as having the same rights politically and socially as men after getting the right to vote. This change is going to become known as a revolution in morals and manners. The symbol of this revolution is the flapper. That is the black and white picture that you see there, those 1920s outfits that you always picture for women with the fringe and all that good stuff. What is also going to push women out of that traditional role was the role that they took in World War I. Women were running to the workplace, and that is going to give them a different social and political status as well. The 19th Amendment is what is really going to inspire women to take this role in politics. The youth in America is going to change. We are going to see child labor laws being proposed because we finally realize that when we push kids into the workplace and they're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, they're not getting educated. If we're not educating our future, then what does our future entail? So you're going to see an increase in the number of years that children are spending in school. We want to educate them. Does this mean that no children were working? No. There are still going to be children who are working. It just means that less are working. Parents are going to start moving away from arranged marriages and kind of organically letting their children socialize. We're also going to see, this is just for you guys, we're going to see a new stage of life develop, the teenager. Teenagers are going to have a little less supervision, a little more separation from their parents. The car influences teenagers. They now can drive away and have that escape. This all changes what it means to be a child. Children are becoming children. We're also going to see less and less one-room schoolhouses because there are buses. We can transport children to schools through the use of buses. So the culture of school develops, and now we're placing more of a value on education. Now, the Harlem Renaissance. We talked a little bit, we mentioned the Harlem Renaissance when we talked about the Great Migration. Remember, The Great Migration is going to be that mass movement of African Americans from the South to the North, seeking out jobs and better conditions, getting away from that heavy racism of the South. Now remember, we also said that it's not that there was no racism in the North, it's just that there was less. So, what actually happened? The Great Migration is going to bring a lot of African Americans north, but what they're going to find is lower paying jobs and poor living conditions because they're moving to the cities. Where do they mostly settle? New York City. Remember, that's where most of the factories are. That's the biggest city in the north, and they settle in Harlem, which is why we call it the Harlem Renaissance. Think about it. What does Renaissance mean? I can hear you. You're saying rebirth. Yes, it is a rebirth of the African American culture, a culture that had been smothered for decades, a culture that was not allowed to represent itself, that was not allowed to just exist. So we have a rebirth of African American culture. Harlem is going to be where that rebirth takes place because that is the settling grounds for many of the African Americans that moved north. This is a very unique culture that is going to form because we have a mix of immigrant culture from the Caribbean islands and we have a mix of the culture of African Americans coming from the South. You are going to see the voice of Marcus Garvey become that of racial pride. Marcus Garvey is going to support the idea of this Back to Africa movement because not everybody is in favor of African Americans staying in the United States. What this movement advocates for is a separation of the races. It means that the whites should stay over here, the blacks should stay over here, and all African Americans should support each other. Before we get to this slide, we'll do this one first, then I'll show you the video. During this time, we are going to see the Jazz Age, the most fun part about the 1920s, come out. Some of the names we've got, we are going to see Louis Armstrong, Bessie Smith. Those are the people that you see pictured. The term Jazz Age, the name comes from F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, if you are looking to read something good, you can read The Great Gatsby. That's going to be all about the 20s. What is jazz? Anybody who's very musical maybe knows this already, but jazz is a combination of two different forms, many different forms of music. We have African American blues and ragtime, and then other popular European-based music. Where does it begin? It begins in Storyville, New Orleans, so down south. And like I said, you have Louis Armstrong becoming the face of jazz. We have Bessie Smith, who becomes known as the Empress of Blues. And it's often going to be played in speakeasies, which we'll talk more about in the next section. And it's going to really demonstrate to us the richness and the depth of the African American culture. So let's take a peek at a video on the Harlem Renaissance to show you a little bit of what I'm talking about.
The Harlem Renaissance is one of the most iconic cultural periods in African American history. Throughout the decade of the 1920s, Black writing, art, and music flourished, ushering in a cultural revolution that rocked the United States.
One of the most important factors that accounted for the rise of what we know of as the Harlem Renaissance is the migration of Black peoples from the South to urban centers like Harlem.
The Jim Crow era began after Reconstruction, and every Southern African American had to think about, what should we do? Should we go or should we stay? For many of these people, it was a matter of life and death, literally.
Sometimes in the most repressive times, we create the most extraordinary art.
Amidst the fervor of the Great Migration, bold, exciting forms of black music evolved, along with venues to listen and dance to this music. Blues and jazz clubs became a central part of life in Harlem, where artists such as Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, Bessie and Mamie Smith rose to prominence.
Began to cry. He went away and never even said goodbye.
The era also saw the burgeoning of literary work by and about African Americans, which the writer Alain Locke compiled into an anthology. He called it The New Negro, and its name came to define a movement.
The Harlem Renaissance is a facet of a larger movement that we think of as the New Negro movement, where you have a new generation of black people, by this point, 2 generations out of slavery, using the arts as a way to help people gain broader civil and political rights.
Some of the framers of what became the Renaissance make the argument that the artistic worth of a people has to be proven by the worth of the art and literature they produced, especially for people that historically, over centuries, have been defined as without culture, without history, and without any record of achievement.
The Harlem Renaissance was the flowering of creativity that had been suppressed for centuries. People that had the sense that things were opening up. And finally, we can be the people that we imagine ourselves to be.
So what you got to see a little bit in there was some examples of who I was talking about in the Harlem Renaissance, and I cannot stress to you enough the importance of this time, and I love that she referred to it in the clip as a flowering of culture, because it really is a blooming, a blossoming of the culture of African Americans in the United States. Next time, we will tackle section 4 of your notes, changing attitudes of the 20s. See you next time, guys.